Welcome everyone to the Phoenix Report. My name is Jack Connor. This is a preview, a pilot, if you will, of my brand new podcast. Some of you may know me as the lead singer and co-founder of the band Vertebraker. Some of you may remember me from other bands I've been in over the years, including Zebrageist, Impatient Nation, WNP, and Lives Page. Now, some of you may also know me from appearances I've made on other podcasts and online radio shows, such as the First and Monday podcast, Trippy Commentaries, which is now affiliated with the Bubba Radio Network, Metal Zone Radio, Star FM, Music Speaks podcast, and the Chronochord Podcast Network. I'm also an occasional actor. I've appeared in short films such as The UT Matrix, Interviews at the Imperial, and the upcoming short films Split Decision and Child Services. A little background information on me. I was born on March 29th, 1984, and raised in Pennsylvania. I grew up about 40 minutes outside of the Philadelphia area in a small town called Chadds Ford. When I was very young, like most kids, I went through different phases of music I would listen to, but I was always most interested in rock music. I remember borrowing my sister's CDs. She would have, certain rock bands of the day, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Green Day, STP, even the latest by Aerosmith. This is in the early 90s. Later on, I think my aunt gave me my first Beatles tape when I was 11. And I remember seeing the Beatles in 1995 on the Beatles Anthology special on ABC. And I was immediately hooked. That was probably the first time where I imagined myself being in a band. I know when I was younger, music was always in the house. My mom taught violin. My sister played violin. When I was younger, I played the cello. I sang in choirs and acted and sang in school plays. But right around when I turned 13, I knew that I wanted to be in a band. I decided to learn how to play bass, and it was then when I was really getting into music. Now, like I mentioned before, I got my first Beatles tape when I was 11, and that sort of sparked my curiosity, but it was bands like Kiss that really captured my imagination, and they led me in turn to bands like Queen, Led Zeppelin, Van Halen, Metallica, Def Leppard, Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, all the way down. Looking back on this time in my life, when I was first discovering music and first wanting to be in a band, I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but it reminds me of the reason why this show is called The Phoenix Report. You see, when I was in junior high, I went through what I'm sure a lot of kids go through at that age. I was bullied pretty heavily growing up, and I suffered from clinical depression. In fact, I still suffer from it a little bit, but it's obviously not as bad as it used to be. It was really through music and being in a band, or at least wanting to be in a band, where I was able to find a sense of identity, a sense of purpose. I remember seeing the logo and the imagery of one of my favorite bands, Queen, for the first time. The logo was designed by their frontman, who is my all-time favorite singer, the late, great Freddie Mercury. He designed the logo with the astrological symbols of each member of the band. You'd have Leo, the lion, or Aquarius, and all sorts of other things. But he also designed the image of a phoenix, which is a mythological bird known for rising from its own ashes, rising up from the fire. And I absolutely fell in love with that imagery. It kind of reminded me of the comic book character of the same name, Jean Grey from the X-Men. She was also called Phoenix. But I loved the symbol of strength it implied, of being burned or being dragged down to the depths of despair, only to rise again stronger than ever before. That imagery and that idea had a profound impact on my life when I was a kid. I came to look at the symbol of the phoenix as sort of my own secret alter ego. Sort of the strong, confident side of myself that I knew was deep down inside, but I wasn't always able to express. Even if no one understood what it meant or what was going on or what I was feeling inside, that's how I felt. Now, when I was 15, my mom and dad and I moved from our home in Pennsylvania all the way to Florida, in a small beach town called Treasure Island, which is just outside the Tampa-St. Petersburg area. Now, this was right when I was starting high school, and all throughout high school and through my freshman year of college, I played bass in the school jazz band, and that was where I really gained an appreciation for several different types of music, all while honing my craft. Now, fast forward a couple years, in 2005, I was a sophomore in college. I joined my first all-original band called Lives Page. Now, these guys and I, we toured up and down the East Coast and played all around Tampa, St. Pete, and we even released an EP called Note to Self. A few years later, I joined a band called WMP, which featured a few guys with whom I would later go on to form the band Impatient Nation. And that band ended up releasing a self-titled EP in 2012. I was the lead singer of Impatient Nation from 2009 through 2012 when the band broke up. Now, during this time, I was also the bass player and co-lead vocalist for another St. Pete area band called Zebrageist. Zebrageist ended up releasing a record of its own in 2010, and we even got some local airplay. It was great. We were even a finalist for one of the local radio station's contests, which was called the 97X Next Big Thing Local Band Search. Those of you who live in Tampa, St. Pete will know what I'm talking about. By late 2012, I had relocated to the east coast of Florida, to a small town called Melbourne. Now, being in a new town was a little bit scary at first. I didn't have a band at that time. I didn't really know anybody in town, but eventually, I met the guys with whom I would form my current band, Vertebreaker. Now, Vertebreaker officially formed in the summer of 2013, and since then we have gone on to play several clubs across the state of Florida. In Melbourne, Orlando, Tampa, several different markets. And we've even done an occasional festival appearance. Nothing major, nothing to brag about, but still very cool stuff. And we are even in semi-regular rotation on Orlando's rock station, WJRR, on Sunday nights. Now I live with my wife a little bit closer to Orlando, in a small town called Winter Garden, which is about like 5 or 10 minutes from Walt Disney World. It's pretty awesome. Now, I know you're probably listening to all this and asking, why are you doing this podcast? What is the point of it? Well, to be honest, I've become a huge fan of podcasting. It seems like podcasting is the new version of the blog or personal journal. You see, nowadays, if you're trying to break into the music industry or any other form of entertainment, it seems like you really have to generate a lot of content yourself if you want to make a connection with new people. And that's really what this podcast is all about. Sort of an extension of my personality and another way to express myself on a more personal level and hopefully make a few new friends and connections along the way. And yes, a lot of what I'll talk about on here will be music related, but I'll cover quite a few other topics, other interests of mine as well. I don't claim to be an expert on anything, but I've always felt that I have a somewhat unique perspective when it comes to the world of music and entertainment. I've always felt like a bit of a contradiction in a few ways. I love rock and roll, I love playing in bands, but I also have a college education, a full-time day job, and a relatively normal life. I'm very passionate about rock bands of all eras, and the great history of this kind of music that dates back to the 1950s and even earlier. But I also try my best to be aware of the world we're living in today, and I hate the idea of being stuck in the past. Now, what does that all mean? I know this all sounds like cliches, but stay with me on this. I think as time goes on, you'll probably understand what I mean. Now, being fairly active in the music scene over the last 10 plus however many years it's been, I have had the honor and privilege of meeting a lot of different people, a lot of interesting people with unique life experiences. And I want to get them on here. I want to share their stories and have fun conversations with them and, just talk about a lot of different things. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not just about music or acting. Outside of all that, I'm also a huge fan of pro wrestling. Now, you've probably heard me talk about that on First and Monday and the Chronocord podcast and Trippy commentaries and other things like that. You're probably wondering why I'm into that. Well, like any other form of entertainment, it has its pros and cons. But when it's done well, to me there is no better blend of athletics and creativity. Now, Think about it. A pro wrestler is essentially a unique hybrid of athlete, actor, and a stuntman. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for the men and women who perform in that business. Now, you can probably hear a lot of my wrestling-related commentary and work on the Chronocord Podcast Network, and I'm going to provide a link to that in the description. But I'm sure some of that will weave its way into my own podcast from time to time. I'm also a huge fan of comic books, superheroes, sci-fi, and other kinds of quote-unquote geek culture and things of that nature. And right now is an amazing time to be a comic book fan. We are living in a golden age of comic book movies and television. Another passion of mine besides that was martial arts. I had studied Taekwondo on and off since I was 6 years old. I finally got my black belt when I was 21. Now, I haven't done it in a few years, but I do miss it. So I'm sure that might come up in conversation from time to time as well. These are just a few big interests of mine in addition to music. But either way, no matter what I'm talking about, I just hope I can do it in a way that you will find entertaining. Now, what I don't want this podcast to be about is negativity or complaining or trying to be shocking or edgy, stirring up heated debates, or just me standing on a soapbox about stuff. Now, do I have opinions that I'm going to express? Of course I do. I'm like anybody else. But I don't want to try and tell you guys how to think or feel about anything. And, I definitely don't want to try and throw anyone under the bus or bash anyone unfairly. Like I said, I want this to be entertaining and I want it to be fun. And I know that I personally don't really find being on a soapbox and that sort of thing, I don't really find that sort of thing entertaining anyway. I gotta admit, guys, I'm a little bit nervous about this. This whole podcasting thing, it's new territory for me. And I'm not normally the most outspoken person. When you first meet me, I'm kind of a quiet guy. I mean, once you get to know me, you can't shut me up. But, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know what this show will end up being like, but I appreciate all of you coming with me along for the ride. Even if you don't like all the same stuff that I do, or even if you don't agree with anything I say, I hope that you can still get something out of it, that you can still be entertained. I hope you can still, that maybe it stirs up some conversation or some thought, but hopefully, we can end up having a good time together. That's what I want this to be about. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at jackxconnor and like me on Facebook at facebook.com/jackconnormusic. Also, feel free to check out my band at www.vertebreaker.net. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, make sure you email me at jackconnorpodcast@gmail.com, or you can tweet me with the hashtag Phoenix Report. Thanks for listening, guys. I hope you enjoy the show. Let's have some fun.